As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, bring the puck deep, put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
One round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs is down, and since we last talked, we have a marathon finisher, Matt Leonardo, against all the odds, just about as close as betting on the Winnipeg Jets 2-goal comeback that finished with 1.8 seconds. It was Matt Leonardo finishing the Boston Marathon. Matt, how are we feeling right now, buddy? It's been a while. I'm assuming you've recovered based on the boosted morale and the San Jose Sharks swagger that you're representing here.
Yeah, it was. If you asked me this a week ago, the answer is definitely different. As we were still a week past running, but I think at this point we're back to pretty much full health, back on the ice skating, which is great. But the first couple of days, you can never really prepare the body for 26.2. I mean, even after some training runs at 13, I was like, oh shoot, this is gonna be a problem. And by about mile 10 or 11, the legs were starting to give out, and once I finished Heartbreak Hill on 21, it was just an absolute nightmare to get to the finish line. But splits didn't look horrendous. We got it done. And yeah, I can't be any happier with just being able to have the medal and have all the friends and family there to celebrate. So couldn't be happier at the moment.
Was there any disappointment at the finish line? Because I got to give you a little bit of flack. Like 16 seconds, we couldn't dig in a little bit. Matt finished at 4 hours and 16 seconds. We got to get a 3 on the start there. Like, how you didn't see it coming the last mile or so?
So I gave everything I had in the tank. At least I thought I did. There was actually a Powerade exchange with my girlfriend on mile 13 that went a little slow that we're blaming the 16 seconds for. It definitely was maybe 2 or 3 of the seconds, but I think mentally it slowed me down for maybe 17 seconds, we'll call it. So, but no, I think, first marathon being run, obviously wanted to be sub 4, and getting so close is just probably going to be the rationale for me trying to do this thing again. So we'll see when that is. I don't know if it's going to be in the next month or two for sure, but Boston 2026 isn't out of the question yet. We'll say that.
Well, it's hard to give any flack for a guy that sat in his bed until you were about 18 miles down just checking the splits, but we're very proud of you here. Let's get into some NHL stuff, and boy, oh boy, has it been an exciting couple of days. 2 Game 7s, 2 2-goal comebacks, and in the last 106 years of NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, up to that point, up to the Colorado-Dallas Game 7 start, there had only been 3 Game 7 comebacks of 2 goals or more. Well, back-to-back nights, we get treated with it. And let's start with the most recent, Winnipeg over St. Louis. All the questions coming in, Connor Hellebuck, whether or not he should be the starter, and immediately it goes south. A goal in the first minute and a half, a goal a couple minutes later, and bang, bang, the whiteout goes dead silent. The Jets are down 2-0, but Matt, somehow he was able to rally a little bit. They make the decision not to pull him, and Brian Boucher immediately said, if I'm behind the bench as Scott Arniel, I'm taking him out here. They keep him in. He was excellent throughout the overtime period, but at that point, would you have taken Hellebuck out, and did you have any concerns there watching as the Jets looked like they were about to implode again?
It's hard watching the first 6 games and him statistically being far and beyond the worst goaltender in the playoffs up to that point, and you give up 2 quick goals, you lose the momentum completely. But at the end of the day, this is your best in a goaltender, right? Like, you really can't switch out to go to Eric Comrie in that situation. I mean, it would have been an absolutely nails decision from Scott Arnold to make that choice. I think for me personally, though, you trust the guy who gives you the best odds to win the game, even if it hadn't been there the first 6 games or the first couple minutes of Game 7, right? You've got 82 game sample of Connor Hellebuck being the best goaltender in the league this year, and you've got a track record of him being such a stellar goaltender over the last 7 or 8 years. I understand all the noise around it, but at the end of the day, I think Hellebuck gave you the best chance to win, and he stood up and took it on straight in the face. And, he had the one extra goal that he gave up in the second to Foxa. But besides that, I mean, there were a couple of saves in overtime that looked unbelievable, and even extended into that second overtime. I think there are a couple of chances that Jordan Kyrou had that I was like, oh, this could get ugly. But Hellebuyck kept the door shut. He kept control of the puck too, which was a huge thing, especially when you get deeper in the game. You're missing Morrissey. You only have 5 defensemen. You gotta freeze the puck and be able to control the pace of the game. And I think Hellebuyck did a great job doing that, as well as keeping the puck out of the net, obviously.
Well, Cole Perfetti gave his team a little bit of life in the second period, but in the final minute, the Blues take a 3-1 lead, and that looked like it was going to be about it. Nothing going really on either side throughout the start of the third period. The Blues kind of just sitting back, shutting them down. Binnington, a big piece of limiting the Winnipeg forecheck, the way he's able to handle pucks. But all of a sudden, it gets to the end of the game. The Jets pull their goaltender, and Nemestikov scores just inside of the 2-minute mark, 1:56 to go. Down to the wire, it looked like it was completely over after what I thought was a broken stick at the point. They're able to get it back up top, D to Pionk, and his shot is or that's the first one, rather, the Pionk shot. And then the second one, they go D to the right circle, the shot to Perfetti, and Perfetti gets his second of the night, tips it in there, a perfect tip. And how about Cole Perfetti, too, a guy who took all kinds of slack over the last 2 years, not being a big performer. They were calling him a bust last year. He stays in Winnipeg, and he's the reason that they're moving on here.
Yeah, unbelievable story for Perfetti. You mentioned it too, right? Like, there was a ton of heat on Perfetti the past 2 or 3 seasons. Former first-round pick, high expectations for Perfetti. Was a very good AHL player coming up in the system and just didn't find his footing in the top 6. Scheifele's out for Game 7, and he's the next man up in terms of the center depth there. And he's out there for the 6-on-5. He ends up scoring the game tire there with 1.8 to go. And then he honestly had a very good overtime period, both of them. He looked very well. He was given opportunities for Winnipeg, and ultimately it was Adam Lowry that got the winner. But I think Perfetti really stood up to the task there of kind of filling those shoes. And I think when we went into this series, we talked about, right, like how much depth we thought Winnipeg had and how strong they were up and down the lineup with that forward core. And I think it really showed with Scheifele out of the entire game, and they were still able to produce offense on all 4 lines.
Let's move on to the Dallas-Colorado series, and then we'll talk about predictions. But again, a Game 7 there, and just about as exciting, a game that looked like Colorado was moving on. They had all the control, a 2-0 lead going into the final period. They extended on that, and then it was the Mikko Rantanen show, down 3-0, and that third goal came just 30 seconds into the third period. Well, Mikko Rantanen, a hat trick in the third period with his team down against his former team, and just seals the deal. And that was a guy, again, similar to Perfetti, but not just last year. It was this series taking heat. Rantanen started with no points the first couple of games. Everyone's saying, look at this bust. Look at this, great deal that Colorado got, picking up Natchez, picking up Drury, getting rid of him and the money that Dallas spent on him. Well, all of a sudden, 11 points over the last 4 games of this series, and 4 of them in the third period of that game. And again, it's a situation where they really stacked him up quick. The empty netter ends up being the difference maker, but 2 goals in the final 2 minutes, just as the Jets did, and to finish off Colorado's season. And they're probably heading home just scratching their heads. That could have been a Stanley Cup final matchup. Instead, the Avalanche are heading home after round 1.
Yeah, if you're Mikko Rantanen, you've got to be the happiest man alive. And he single-handedly carried Dallas the last 2 games, right? He had 8 points in those last 2 games. And yes, the stats weren't up there, but if you watched the games and saw what Mikko Rantanen was doing in the offensive zone, he was still creating a ton of chances, whether they came off of his stick or his teammates. I think he definitely wasn't putting up the point production that you would want out of a guy that you just paid a crap ton of money to put up points, but he was still driving the offense in different ways. And I think it finally started to click together over the last 2 games of the series, and it clicked exponentially, right? Backs against the wall. If you're Dallas, you want somebody who's got that playoff and Stanley Cup experience to take over a game. And This is what they traded for. This is what they paid for, and they got everything they wanted in those last 2 games of the series. So props to Rantanen. It'll be interesting to see where Colorado moves from here. And Ditzo, I'm curious kind of on your thoughts on where Colorado moves from here. They get first round exited here. And a team that a lot of people had high hopes for, including the people in that locker room. So, but props to Dallas. I mean, we're kind of out of it when going into Game 7, even before the series. A lot of analysts had them losing. You don't have Heiskanen for the entire series. Jason Robertson doesn't play Game 7. And again, similar to Winnipeg, depth plays a huge role in it. And they were getting offense from all 4 lines. And Mikko Rantanen ended up just picking up the slack in the last 2 games for everyone that was out.
On a lower level analyst, I was the exact same, having Colorado advancing and Dallas out. Heiskanen, the real reason for that, because that's a guy that last year was averaging 29 minutes time on ice during the playoffs without him, and it didn't seem to matter much. And I really felt about 3 times throughout that series that Colorado was going to be out of it. When they're going back to Colorado down, they were able to hold it together at home. Then Dallas with that big Game 5 win, Colorado comes out, they're able to hang on, and then all of a sudden in Game 7, it feels like it's theirs to lose. I was really impressed with Dallas. It sounds like Heiskanen's about to come back, not to mention Robertson, their top forward, well, maybe their second best, the way Rantanen's performed here, but they're going to get him back as well. And all of a sudden, Dallas becomes just about the Cup favorite from a team that many, as you mentioned, were fading there. But man, oh man, was that an exciting series. And honestly, the way this playoffs is matching up, the first round, the way the matchups fell, probably, with the exception of Carolina, New Jersey, 7 of the 8 matchups are 10 bell storylines. And then going into this round, it's still the exact same thing with 4 matchups left. So, as you look forward here, Maddie, that's the health is the big one. And Winnipeg potentially missing Scheifele. He hasn't been skating full health or with pads on. Morrissey gets banged up there in Game 7. Those are 2 huge hits. On the Dallas side, coming back, you now have Heiskanen and Robertson. Where do you see here in round 2 your predictions being with those storylines?
So, I've been back and forth on this. This is, I thought Dallas, Colorado was a Stanley Cup preview kind of series. I think this is even bigger of a heavy hitter, right? Like, I think Winnipeg really showed the toughness and the style of play that they're able to play. And I think from a St. Louis team who was one of the hotter teams coming into this NHL playoffs, they really gave it everything they had. And I think, Winnipeg did a really good job, especially towards the end of that game and into the overtimes, of controlling the game, right? They did not let St. Louis play the game that they wanted to play. They were going to play it Winnipeg's way, where it was a lot of cycling. It was a lot of hard-nosed battles in the corners, pucks getting to the outside, right? Nothing really coming up the middle there. You had the one Ehlers breakaway for Winnipeg, but besides that, a lot of the chances were suppressed to the outside. And I think, you're getting that play out of Winnipeg, and you're getting Connor Hellebuck at his absolute worst. So if he can even give you something there, I have a really hard time finding a way that Winnipeg loses the series. I think obviously the injuries are going to be a huge concern for the Jets, right? And we'll see if these injuries are playable. Obviously at the end of the series, you get the report card of what everyone's playing through. And I'm sure Scheifele and Morrissey's are going to be ugly, but I think at the end of the day, right, like, Winnipeg really has shown that they are a strong team unit as a whole, and they're getting a ton of great offense from all 4 lines. I mean, you look at a guy like Brandon Tanev last night, like, what was it, 9 hits and 4 blocked shots coming from the 4th line, right? Like, they're getting it from everywhere. It's not, it really is a sense of next man up. And, if Rantanen doesn't put up 8 points in his last 2 games, is Dallas even here, right? So, For me, it's tough back and forth. I can obviously see the path for Dallas to go win this series, but if you can get anything better out of Hellebuck, especially what you saw from that last period and the 2 overtimes, and they can carry this momentum, I have a tough time saying no to the President's Trophy Jets.
Well, surprise, surprise, I'm going to take the exact opposite on this one. I think this is a Dallas sweep almost. I'm going to say gentlemen sweep Dallas in 5. Maybe they get 6 out of it. And I just think because of what you said with the amount of hits that Winnipeg had to take, you got a couple guys beat up. Dallas on the side of more coming to health. That wasn't as physical of a series in the 7-game win. I think Winnipeg's going to have a lot more trouble keeping that same intensity that it took to beat St. Louis. I think Dallas is also a much deeper team. So I'm going to take Dallas in 5. Would not be surprised if it goes 6, but definitely is going to be another storyline, whether or not it's Dallas who can come through or Winnipeg trying to prove themselves as a playoff team here. And I think Hellebuck is a major question mark around that. The struggles he had, especially on the road, and Dallas is not an easy environment to play in. St. Louis looked like their barn was rocking, but you just wonder how much of that lingers over. He seemed to prove it a little bit there, gaining confidence throughout that game 7, but he's going to have to be a lot better. You can't let in those quick squeakers and go down 2-0 at home. They're going to need the whiteout, and they're going to need to get everything out of those first 2 games. We'll see starting on Wednesday. To backtrack quickly, I realize I just brushed over your question. Where does Colorado go? We'll cover that in a couple episodes upcoming as we look through all of the teams that are no longer in contention for the playoffs. But I think it's got to start with the center depth, and it's tough because they went all out at the deadline. They pick up Drury. They pick up Natchez to help out with the speed of McKinnon. They get Brock Nelson. I'm assuming Nelson's not going to be coming back unless they get him on a lower AAV contract, but getting rid of Ranton in there, maybe they have a little more money to spend kind of on that lower 6. I still think there's a few question marks, but boy, oh boy, were they impressive. And that's, a couple minutes away from being a team that really, if they're going into this next round against Winnipeg, I think is just as much of a favorite as Dallas could be looking forward to the Cup. But I think Dallas has the easiest route here just because I see Winnipeg as one of the weaker outs left. Let's go down now to stay in the West, and I'm not going to give Matt another word on that one in the Pacific here.
This wouldn't be fun if we didn't just disagree on everything, right? Like if this was just chalk picks across the board, that's basically what the NBA is, right?
That's the only reason I keep you around here, Matty, right? It's because somebody's got to make bad takes, but we'll see. I'm not going to say much, but your West Coast didn't go so well. I went 7 for 8. That was my only miss there. Maybe that's going to continue to be my only miss is up in the Central Division. But Vegas and Minnesota, let's start there here in the Vegas-Edmonton matchup. A 4-2 win in 6 games for Vegas. I would say at no point in this series did it look like Vegas was winning in 6 games. This seemed like it was Minnesota's to lose, and all of a sudden you blink your eye, they're up late in that 5th game to take a 3-2 lead on the road, and suddenly Vegas comes back, pulls the goalie, wins that game. Then they go on the road, same thing. Minnesota kind of kept fighting back. Every time Vegas got an inch, they tied it up. Vegas comes away with 6. Matt, what were you most impressed with? Let's start on the Minnesota side, and then what do you see for Vegas going forward?
Yeah, I mean, starting with Minnesota, their top guys were their top guys, and they really showed out, right? Kirill Kaprizov looked on the ice like one of the best players in the playoffs to start out, right? I think Matthew Boldy had such a great playoff production there, right? I think their defense looked good. Gustafsson did everything that he could, right? It's tough when you're playing and everything's going right and you're reaching that potential and you still fall short. And, they're a puck bounce away here and there to having that game go to 7 or even winning it themselves in 6. But I think the bigger story there is just quietly how strong Vegas is, right? Because they were able to take a team who started off the season super hot in Minnesota. They got hurt middle of the year. They kind of fell off. They picked up speed towards the end of the year, and this was their full roster going into the playoffs. You got the best of the Minnesota Wild in the playoffs, and Vegas was still able to suppress them in 6. And I think, right, there are definitely, it's what hockey is, right? A couple bounces can change things here or there, but props to Vegas for really taking control of a lot of those games, even when it looked like Minnesota was maybe dominating the play. They didn't panic. They didn't start to get out of position. They played their style of hockey and waited for their opportunities and really took advantage when they could. So I think Vegas is a sneaky, scary team in this sense, just in the fact that a lot of the teams that made it to the second round probably didn't see the best versions of the teams they played against, right? And we'll talk about the Edmonton series, we'll talk about the Washington series, we'll talk about the Carolina series, but I think Vegas got one of the toughest draws from what we saw looking retrospectively in a Minnesota team that came into the playoffs and at full health and was really clicking towards those first couple games. But props to Vegas for holding the fort down. And again, I think this is another dangerous team here in the West where really they might not have played their A plus and they still were able to what looked like somewhat handedly take care of business in 6.
Well, not to mention that Minnesota coming in was pretty much the team that everybody waved off. They were supposed to be the easiest out. That was certainly not the case. And a lot of that comes down to the health they got. Big name guys coming back. And boy, are they going to be scary next year thinking about the money coming off. They can sign Kirill Kaprizov to that big extension. And not to mention some probably big-time free agents that are going to be coming in there. Jack Eichel, a slow start. He had no points through 3 games. Got it going later in that first round. What impact does Vegas need to see out of him going forward?
I mean, he's their X factor. He drives that top line and he drives that power play. And it's funny when you watch him, he doesn't look like he's moving very fast or moving at all, but he's very sneaky quick in terms of his decision making and creating opportunities for others. And I think it's something going into a series against Edmonton where you're going to probably be matched up with the McDavid or Draisaitl line if they're split for the majority of the shifts you see, right? Eichel's going to have to really step up on the defensive side and suppress some of those opportunities. And I think Eichel's a sneaky two-way player in that sense of where his defensive game is usually overshadowed by the fact that he's, one of, if not the biggest names on the Vegas forward crew. But I think it's going to be a lot of taking the opportunities where you can and not catching yourself too far back into the zone where you can let McDavid's get up the ice by himself there. So I think a lot of his importance will show up off of the stat sheet, but I think he will still need to be able to produce at the point per game pace that he knows he can in order for Vegas to continue to, keep up with the goals that Edmonton is going to score.
Let's move on to Edmonton and LA. Another 6-game finish that was maybe a 6-game stunner. The LA Kings jumped all over Edmonton at the start of the first round, a 2-0 win. The LA Kings, the best team close to an NHL history on home ice this season, 2-0, holding the home ice for the series and thinking maybe it could go 7 after Edmonton stormed back at home. You think about a couple maybe questionable coaching decisions with a few challenges there, but all of a sudden 4 straight wins for the Edmonton Oilers. Goaltending question marks is where I want to start here. Skinner, not good in the first 2 games. They put Cal Pickard in. He finishes the series. But is this something that you see going forward? I mean, right now, you got to stick with Pickard the way he's played, but is he a cup contending guy when you're going to be up against this Vegas offense?
I don't think he is. And it really is a big concern. And the Oilers knew this going throughout the entire season that Skinner was kind of a loose cannon in terms of what Stuart Skinner you were going to see. And they didn't address it. They didn't address it at the deadline. They didn't address it in the offseason last year. And here we are, in the playoffs asking what the hell are they going to do in goaltending. And I think, right, you've got the two of the best players in the world on your team, right? So I think they can carry you as far as you want to go. But time and time again, we've seen that hockey is a sport where you need to really have a full 20 on your roster. And even in the playoffs, especially with injuries, beyond that, right? There's still the stat that nobody who's made over, $10 million has ever won a Stanley Cup, right? So if anyone's going to break that, it's probably McDavid and Draisaitl. But at the end of the day, I think in terms of the goaltending, it's a huge concern going into this series because I think the Kings really fell flat when Pickard went in and they really just weren't able to catch the momentum. But I think when you run into better teams, like you run into Vegas in the next round, if you run into the winner of Winnipeg, Dallas, regardless of which team that is, much more consistent, many more opportunities from throughout the lineup than the Kings this year, where you kind of saw a lot of their stuff come from that top six. So I think if you're Edmonton, you're super concerned with what that goaltending looks like, and even the defense in front played okay. I'll say it wasn't anything spectacular, but a lot of high scoring games, and that's going to really scare you off if you're a fan of the Oilers, because you have a bad 2 games from McDavid or Draisaitl, and you're really at a point where you're not able to make up a 2-0 lead against some of these stronger teams as you go further into the playoffs.
One of the big storylines was the lack of Matthias Ekholm on the blue line. The offense was able to hold the weight throughout this first round, and a lot of that came 6-on-5. Thinking back to one of the better games of the entire playoff so far, that game 3, maybe game 2, where Edmonton pulled the goaltender, scored twice late just to get scored on by the Kings, who come back and win in regulation. Other than that, the top guys were able to get it done for Edmonton. Is that something that you see moving forward, or are they going to need that defensive depth to step up a little bit?
I think they definitely need to solve a lot of issues on that back line, especially, you have question marks in goal. Ekholm not being in the lineup has been clearly a huge factor in the amount of goals that you're giving up. You're giving up a lot higher chance opportunities, right? I think there are definitely some that Skinner needed to stop, but at the end of the day, if you keep seeing time and time again really high leverage chances, you're gonna give up goals, especially against a Vegas team who defensively looks so sound in the first round. And I think if there's a team that is going to be able to suppress the offense of McDavid and Draisaitl, I think Vegas is one of those teams that you point to first, especially with them being pretty much at full health, especially on that blue line. So I think if McDavid and Draisaitl are really going to have to step it up if you're going to get the same production from your defense and goaltending.
Round 2 predictions: Vegas versus Edmonton. Where are we going here?
I got to stick with Vegas here. I think they're a very deep team. They're a very consistent team, and they know the style of play that they're going to put out there, and they're going to force teams to kind of play in those low scoring, every goal matters kind of games, whereas Edmonton's kind of just that loose cannon team. I think as you go further into the playoffs, those loose cannons start to dwindle, and very rarely do they end up winning the cup. But I think Vegas is super strong this year, especially on the blue line. And I think Aiden Hill has been playing very well for them in net as well. So I think it's tough to bet against McDavid and Draisaitl, but I'm sure you're going to have your coins on them as well. So, but for me, I think it's Vegas. I think it more than likely is going to be 6 or 7 either way. I don't know if I see a team really dominating this unless, the Stars of Edmonton really slow down and that goaltending gets somehow worse. But if I have to pick one, I'm probably picking Vegas here.
I will say that if I was betting and putting money on this series, something I don't want to go anywhere near, I would go with Vegas just because it's a pick 'em. I think Vegas is the underdog, at least the last time I looked at it, not by much, but Vegas certainly the better of the two teams depth-wise. I'm going to take the Oilers. I think it's Oilers in 7, and I just think that the Stars offensively are going to have enough to make a difference. And I think the Oilers offense is going to be able to push it from what you said, a low scoring style team where we saw some of those struggles in the games they lost, getting the offense going against Minnesota, where Minnesota's offense was really able to strike on them early and they couldn't quite catch up there. I think Edmonton has the opportunity to do the same thing, kind of get the offense going quick and then just try to hold on for dear life. And I think McDavid and Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Zach Hyman, Bouchard are going to have enough to get them through this round. I have Edmonton as my my cup winner. I would say Dallas is certainly my favorite after one round, but I think Edmonton has enough. I'm kind of in the same boat, though. It's going to be a close, maybe 7-game series here as we look towards the East. On the West, Matt has Winnipeg and Vegas. I have the complete opposite with Dallas and Edmonton. We'll go to the Metro here first, and I'm waiting on what is going on in the Toronto-Florida game that's just started. Currently 1-0 Toronto Maple Leafs, but we'll give that one a little bit more time to fester before we start talking about our thoughts on that series, Matt. And we'll go to the Carolina Hurricanes. pretty uneventful East Coast hockey that we watched. None of these teams really stressed over making their way to the second round, the most of which was Toronto, who had to go to 6 games, but 3 5-game sets, the first being Carolina and New Jersey. This, I would say, probably the most expected result. I thought maybe 6 games, but it ends up being 5. Carolina beats a very beaten down New Jersey Devils team. They didn't have Jack Hughes. They didn't have Siegenthaler for half of this series. No Dougie Hamilton. Game 1, Brennan Dillon and Luke Hughes go down. Pretty much no chance for the Devils. And honestly, Carolina makes quick work of them. I did not like what I saw out of the Carolina Hurricanes as we look forward.
Yeah, I think it's tough to gauge just given the fact that you're playing, 4 of their worst defensemen or 4 of their best defensemen being out and not having their star forward. Like, it's tough to gauge exactly how you judge Carolina from this, right? Like maybe you think it's a good confidence booster, tune up, kind of get the game right, get healthy for Washington. But part of it's also like, okay, this is not a great looking team that you're playing against. And you had to come back from a huge deficit in game 5 to even get it to overtime, end up winning the game there to close it out in 5. For me, not a lot to talk about in terms of the series itself, but I'm very interested to see the statement that Carolina makes in the first 2 games. I think it's going to really define what that Washington series looks like.
You need to get one, at least.
I think you have to get one, right? Like, I think, if you are Carolina, right, you're happy with the result, right? You're done in 5. You're able to kind of rest up, and we'll see what Freddie Anderson's health looks like. I know he got injured at some point during the series, but I think it's tough to gauge exactly how good you feel if you're a Hurricanes fan coming out of this. I mean, Ditzel, you can probably give that answer as a Hurricanes fan, but I think for me, if I'm looking at this, I'm saying, okay, brand new week, fresh slate, good tune up in the first round, but let's really put this into second gear if we're gonna really make a fight for it.
Looking at the playoffs from a Carolina standpoint, I thought they had the best draw looking at potential to make the Cup final, and a lot of that revolves around Toronto somehow getting past Florida, which is not going to happen. But the Devils were a layup. We've established that. Washington going into, I thought Washington was going to have a lot of trouble against Montreal. They made that pretty clear that the physicality is something that they've got going. And that is one thing that seriously scares me going into the second round matchup. But if Carolina, I would say on paper, is the better team, the deeper team, more star power, if they can get past that physicality and match up against a Toronto Maple Leafs team, there's a road to get there. I think that Florida is going to inevitably advance, and if Carolina plays Florida, it's going to be the, I believe, 4th straight Eastern Conference final that they lose in 4 games. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but looking, there's so many concerns here, and number one is the goaltending. Freddie Anderson just signed the 1-year extension for next year. I can't begin to figure out what the decision on that was, because Pyotr Kochetkov should be the future, hasn't really had a chance to take over. Anytime Anderson's healthy, he gets the 1A spot, and then he gets hurt. The same thing happens in that first round. Fortunately for the Hurricanes, it sounds like he's going to be back. But if Tom Wilson is rushing the net, bumping into him, and causing havoc, how long is he going to stay in this series? I really don't think Kochetkov is fresh enough, and we saw that in that Devils game on home ice. They go down, was it 3 or 4-0? I was playing intramural floor hockey, so I missed this. It was 3-0 when our game started, and all of a sudden it's 4-4 when our game finished to come back to it. But it's a major concern in that aspect. And I thought the Devils really gave them a run for their money, even though it ends up being a 4-1 series. I worry about that a lot against a Washington Capitals team here that also only needed 5 games to advance. So let's go to that series. And as a Hurricanes fan, you're really banking on, the hope that Montreal can at least scrape one more game out, bring it back to the Bell Center, maybe rough and tumble them. But boy, were they outmatched, and just in the size category alone. It was the physical play, and I know, it was something that was noticeable right off the first couple of games. They had no chances in front of the net. Washington dominating the possession, dominating the chances. It was impossible to get anything like tip chances in front. Everything's coming from the outside. And if Washington can keep playing that way, it's going to be a pretty hard way to get them out. And I think it's a pretty big head turner here where a lot of people were still talking about them, right up there, kind of similar to the Jets, right up there as President's Trophy, candidates, could have easily got it. Not much respect going into the first round, and they really proved it there.
Yeah, I think the quite literal and metaphorical smack in the mouth is probably the best way to describe what we saw from these Capitals. They're a big team. We knew this going into it. We knew that size was going to play a factor, especially given the fact that they're playing Montreal, who not only is the youngest team to ever make the NHL playoffs, I think their average age is like 25.6, but a lot of their studs that we're aware of, Caulfield, Suzuki, Hudson, they're smaller guys. It was probably the biggest nightmare matchup if you're a Canadiens fan, because you got to go up against these absolute giants, and really Josh Anderson's the only physical, large-bodied player that's going to be able to respond. And we saw the response on the bench. I mean, that was an unbelievable end of the second period, or the game 4 or 5, when they were literally throwing hands on the bench. It was awesome to watch.
Who's going to defend you? Somebody's getting hurt tonight. Tom Wilson. Just what we talked about the last episode. Scariest guy in the NHL. Yeah,
he's an absolute maniac. We're gonna have to put that in the category there. Props to Montreal, though. They definitely fought, right? I think none of the games they really were super out of, but a lot of the question marks from the Capitals going in was they've got a lot of guys who don't have playoff experience, and we're kind of playing higher than what we would expect from them. You look at guys like Alexei Protas and Dylan Strome, for example, and they stepped up in a huge way. Dylan Strome, I think, had 9 points. Yeah, 9 points in 5 playoff games. Like, he's legit as a 1C. And you look at the whole roster, and it's like they've got the veteran presence. They've got young guys that can bring some spark and some speed into the lineup. Their defense is completely restructured. And after leaving game 3 and what looked to be completely done, Logan Thompson's been outstanding in net. I think this is a very scary team, and I know we're going to get into the predictions here, but if Carolina comes out flat, I feel like Washington's the kind of team that can just pummel them into the ground and not even let them up at any point in this series. I think if there's any series that's most likely to be a sweep, I honestly think it's this one, just because of the way the Capitals play. And I think, if you're going to get this production from guys that you typically wouldn't expect continued into the playoffs, I think they can really be a team that makes a deep run here.
I agree right with you. I will start it off with the predictions. I'm going to go the other way. I got tickets to game 6, so I'm really banking on it making there. I am going to take Carolina in 7, but I'm right there with you. I could easily see this being a 5-game Capitals wipeout. I think Carolina matches up better still. I think they have enough depth in the lines, and I think it's that forechecking style that when you look at the regular season matchups, which, that only says so much, but 3-1 in the regular season, and 2 of those, one was the game where Washington tried to just kill everybody, tried to impose their will. They went down quick. Carolina was able to hang in there. Then Carolina went on the road and was still able to take one out there. I think the Canes are going to be able to get the forecheck going enough and kind of withstand. I think the Capitals take game 1. I think Carolina is going to be able to bounce back, take one of those 2, and really use that home ice advantage. They're so good on home ice with the line matching, one of Rod Brindamore's strengths. I'm going to take Canes in 7, but certainly as a Hurricanes fan, not comfortable going into this one. What do you see?
I think it's going to be Washington, probably in 5, maybe 6. I just think they really can put a beating on a team that might still have a little bit of cold feet going into this. I think when you get into the second round, you really got to be hitting your stride. And it just, to me, doesn't seem like Carolina's there quite yet. I think it might just be too late if it ends up being game 3, game 4 when they hit their stride. Because if you go down 2-0 against the Capitals, I feel like it's going to be very tough to come back from that. So For me, I really think this Capitals team looks very good, and I have a hard time seeing them not getting it done before 6 games. Honestly, I think more than likely 5, but I think Carolina definitely is a good enough team to get the series done, but we would need to see the best of Carolina, which I just don't think we've seen in a decent amount of time leading up even before the playoffs started.
I'll agree with you there. And if I'm going to bet on this series, I'm right with you, because looking at the odds, Carolina, and I really don't understand it at all. In the books is way overinflated. I believe it was minus 162 last time I looked. And Washington comes in at about plus 135. That is just way too much bang for your buck. If you can get Washington minus 1.5, probably in the plus 200 range, that seems like, a steal of a bet for a pretty good chance that Washington could go and run away. We'll see. I got my fingers crossed at least that this one makes it to where the Sens did. And I'm kind of an absolute sonk on the Carolina Hurricanes. We've been there 3 of the last 4 years, the game that Carolina has been eliminated. Bought tickets to Game 6, so if you're betting, probably Washington in 6 is a pretty good one to put down. Florida and Tampa may have been the biggest surprise for me in this first round, and not because of who won. Florida is my Eastern Conference champion pick, but it was the way they got it done. This was a game or a series I thought was going to be easily 7 games and really a slosh fest. Florida made pretty quick work of it. I guess you could say with some of the suspensions and the hits that maybe they mucked it around. It really was not much of a physical series there. And Florida, they look pretty dominant, although they are now down 2-0 in Game 1 to the Maple Leafs here as we record on Monday night. Matt, a very impressive start for the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, this is the Florida Panthers team that we knew was going to be there coming into the playoffs, right? They won the Cup last year. They made the finals the year before. They know what they're doing. They got everyone back off their injury list, and they're almost at full health, we'll say, at this point. I think the one thing, maybe to not bash Florida in a sense, but I think Tampa came out super flat in this series. Their top guys didn't produce as much as you would hope. Obviously, a guy like Brendan Hagel is somebody that you can point to that kind of was a disappointment in this series. But, I think this wasn't a Tampa team. Tough to say because they were so hot in March, right? But same thing with the Canes, right? The Canes were one of the hottest teams in March too. And you show up flat in April, especially against a team like Florida, they're going to bury you, and they're going to bury you super quick. And, I think this really is a wake-up call for everyone who is kind of iffy on the fence about how Florida ended their season. I think we know who they are now, especially, they're going to hit their stride right at the right time. So, props to Florida for getting it done. But I do think Tampa definitely came out a lot more flat and wasn't – it just seemed like they tried to do too much in a lot of the games. So, for me, it's as much of a big – play for Florida as it is a disappointment for Tampa Bay.
As we pump their tires, a power play goal, now 2-1 Panthers. The real story was some of the vicious hits that went down, a couple of suspensions throughout this series. You think that's something that they need to clean up, or that's just Florida Panthers hockey? Because one concern I had going in was all those guys that were on the long-term injury. Marchand had just come back. Matty Tkachuk was out. Ekblad had been out since January when he got the PED suspension. They were snapping it around the offensive zone, and that certainly was not a concern. But a couple players get suspended throughout that first round. Obviously, they'll be back. You think that's something that they kind of continue to push in against this Maple Leafs team?
Maybe not a suspension worthy, but they're going to be a physical team. It's the way the Panthers have always played, right? You think about some of the guys that were in their bottom 6 last year, and like a Ryan Lomberg, who's now no longer with the team, and they replace those kind of guys. And even, the Sam Bennett's of the world, the Brad Marchands, the Matthew Tkachuk. This is the Panthers. They're a bunch of freaking rats. I almost dropped a hard one for the podcast. I'll try and keep it clean on here, but they're rats. It's what they do. It's their identity, and they're so good at it because they can really draw the line and get right up to where they need to be without crossing it. Obviously, the suspension to Ekblad was pretty ridiculous in terms of like his hit on Hagel, right? Like that stuff he kind of got to clean up. But they're going to be a pesty team. They're going to be a pain in the ass to play every single series that they play. And when you have that kind of core, especially when you can get those guys to produce, right? Like a lot of the bottom six guys that you think of that are a pain to play, you really can only deploy them 7 to 8 minutes a night, but you're getting your rats on the ice for 15 to 20 minutes a night on the forward core. Like you're just going to have to play against those pests night in and night out. So, I think they're going to keep that identity, and I think it's going to be a big X factor for them moving forward.
The most disappointing finish of the first round was that we're not going to be able to get Matt up to an Ottawa Senators game. Pretty expected there. Unfortunately, Matt was in the heart of training. I was finishing up golf season in grad school here, so we'll have to wait till next year to head up to the Canadian Tire Center. But, Matt, going into this one, all the talk was around the depth and the experience that the Leafs have, the inexperience, and probably a little bit of lack of lineup depth on the Senators side. That showed through easily in the start. They were on the fringe of being swept there 3-0, able to get back-to-back wins, and then all of a sudden the narrative shifts. Maybe Ottawa can get one more push a Game 7, and then you never know what's going to happen there. But Maple Leafs in Ottawa get it done, and they move on here. What were your biggest takeaways from this one?
I think the big thing here is I think a lot of Maple Leafs fans felt the pressure of this series, right? I think if they lost this series, the pandemonium around the front office and that team was going to be absolute chaos. And, I think you go up 3-0, you lose a couple there. And, to be honest, games 2 and 3 probably could have swung the other way, right? Like, I think they're a puck bounce away from being down 2-1 going into those games 4 and 5. But, I think this Toronto team felt different in the sense that they were really creating high chances and really driving play. I think they had one bad game, right? I think Game 5 was an ugly one. But besides that, I really felt like they took control of the other 5 games. And, yeah, they lost one of them. But at the end of the day, I was really impressed with what I saw with Toronto. I think when you get a team like Ottawa, who's A, super physical, and B, an absolute wild card of a team that has nothing to lose, like you're going to have some chaos in that series, but they were able to calm the storm. I think Stolarz has looked fairly solid so far. You're getting your production out of your top 4 guys, the guys that you pay all that money. And, I think if you're Toronto, you got to be pretty happy coming out of this series, right? Like regardless of what the fans started to feel like after games 4 and 5, like you won Game 6, you moved on, you're getting to the second round here. And, maybe they didn't play their best hockey, but I think they played a very good game looking at the series as a whole against Ottawa there.
As we go forward here, our last round of predictions, and the Toronto Maple Leafs up 3-1 in the first period. Bobrovsky still in so far. Where do you see this one going? I'm going to go 2 ways first. I'm going to say if I'm watching this one right now, I'd probably pick the Cats to come back, but hoping that Florida would lose the first game, that would be a great spot to pick the Florida in 6 win. Where do you see this series going, Matty?
I mean, I know where you're going, so naturally, without even having to ask the question, where I'm going to go. Toronto was my pick before the season. I think they still look very good. They're still 100% healthy, and I think the way they're creating offense is something that is going to remain consistent, right? Like they're not getting lucky bounces here and there. They're not just throwing crap onto the net, right? I think they're winning a ton of battles in the corners, especially a guy like Matty Nyes. Like he only had 3 points, but man, he looks so like he can take the puck from anybody in that corner. And it's just super impressive to watch him be able to create offense in such a secondary way, which is something that these Leafs teams didn't really have in the past. So for me, I think Toronto's star power is going to continue to play well. I think this is the best goaltending we've seen from a Leafs team over the past 7 or 8 years when they keep getting eliminated. I think the additions that they made are making a huge impact. Like I think the Riley-Carlo pairing has looked really good so far. And I think a guy like Simone Benoit, even on the third pair, has looked really solid. You're getting production from Ekman Larson. Like for me, I understand the Panthers are the Panthers, but I really think this is Toronto's year. I said it before the series. I said it before the playoffs. I really felt strongly about this Toronto team, and nothing that I saw from that Ottawa series has swayed me away from that, which is why I think I have to go Toronto here.
I'm going to take Florida in 6, and I think that there were some things in that first round against Ottawa that Florida didn't show that would just, concern me, that Toronto still doesn't have enough of that depth. And really up until that clinching game, there were still questions around the core four. Matthews kind of able to silence that there, but when they get in those clinching game spots, and I think Florida is just that much tougher of an out. You get 3 former Stanley Cup champion Panthers onto the Leafs side this year, but how many more are still on the Panthers this year? And that's a team that knows how to get it done. They've been there back-to-back years, and maybe the one thing that Toronto's got going for them is you hope that that's just too much hockey. I just still don't think that the Leafs have enough. They've been a little shaky on home ice, and it looks like they're off to a good start in game 1 here. But if Florida can take one of these first 2, get back home, and just stay in it for these first couple of games while they still get guys off of that IR rust, maybe to continue to gel with all the new faces that they've added in, get my guy Nico Sturm, lighting it up from the defensive end on the penalty kill, maybe drop a few hits. I still think Florida is, easily a favorite to make it out of the East. And you got to say either of these teams, whoever comes out of the Atlantic, that is such a gong show, is probably going to be matched up against any of the 4 from the West, who are, all pretty dominant figures in the NHL this season. Let's go with some power rankings as we close it off. We're going to transition it over here. Matt's going to hop off. Jake's coming on to talk a little bit of PWHL, and we're going to get back to our weekly schedule upcoming here. Next week, we're going to be looking at the teams that didn't make it, a little bit of touch up on what's gone on round 2, and then by then it'll be conference final time, and that will be the 1-year anniversary of the start of the Fifth Liners podcast. Pretty crazy here, Maddie, but if you had to rank them 1 through 8, what would your rankings be?
Oh, put me on the spot here. It was funny. I saw people ranking them on Twitter, especially a Casey Ditzel ranking that I might not have 100% agreed with personally, but it's tough for me because I feel like I could see a path where all 8 of these teams win the cup, which I think in the past we maybe have not seen before. I obviously think there are some teams that are more likely than others, but realistically, I think each team is playing in a matchup right now where it really is like a bloodbath to get out of. And I think even if we had some replacement teams, right? Like if Tampa ended up making it in over Florida, if Colorado gets it over Dallas, right? Like there are still like really high potential matchups that were left out of the first round. I think it was just such a deep NHL season where it was like really uncertainty here. But off the top of my head, I think I've got to go Toronto 1. I still think that they're my cup favorite as they were going into this. I'm still going to lean on that because I, again, haven't seen anything to make me believe otherwise. I'll take Winnipeg 2 and Dallas 3. I think both of those teams have just looked really solid in those series, understanding they both played 7 games. But at the end of the day, right, like those were 2 hard-fought playoff-style battles, and I think that's going to pay dividends in the long run for them, getting that kind of on-the-ropes experience. I think it just sways your confidence a lot more than you might think. I'll take Vegas at 4. I think, they just are a very strong, deep team that what you're going to get out of them. And I think it's going to be, interesting to see how they can shut down McDavid and Draisaitl. But if they can do that, right, like I think they put themselves in a really good spot the rest of the playoffs here. I'll take Florida 5 by a hair. Obviously, the defending Stanley Cup champs, you could easily see that team higher. But I think at the end of the day, right, like they've got a tough matchup with Toronto, I think. And I think they still have some question marks in certain pieces of their lineup, which concerns me a little bit, especially if we're going to get this kind of Bobrovsky that we've seen so far in game 1. I'll take the Capitals 6. Again, question marks on the longevity and sustainability of some of their offense. But again, if they get the play out of their guys who have been playing at the top so far, right? Like if Dylan Strome still produces and Alexei Protas still produces, PLD looks still good. Like it's tough to not pick them to go further as just how physical they are and how they can really take over a series like that. I'll take Edmonton at 7. Like it's crazy that they're this low, but I just think other than McDavid and Draisaitl, like I'm very nervous about the rest of that lineup as a whole, especially without Matthias Ekholm. And then Carolina's at 8 just because I don't think they're at their stride right now. I think we've seen the best hockey out of Carolina this season, and I'm not sure if we're going to see that again. I think if they hit their stride though, right? Like on paper, they're a much better team than Washington, in my opinion, if they play to their potential. And then you get the Toronto-Florida series, which is going to beat each other up, and they find themselves in the Stanley Cup Finals at that point. So, I think for once in quite some time, all 8 teams have a real strong chance. But if I got to recap it quick, I go Toronto, Winnipeg, Dallas, Vegas, Florida, Washington, Edmonton, and Carolina at the rear.
I'm going to go a different way and looking at a lot of thought on path. Number 1 for me is Dallas. I think they're going to make quick work of Winnipeg. Unlike you've got there, I think Dallas in 5, as we covered earlier, and that's one of the main reasons I have them as my number 1 threat to win the Stanley Cup here. Number 2 is Florida on the east side. I would honestly say Florida could arguably put at number 1. I think they have the easiest path. I think they're going to get through Toronto just based on physicality. I don't see Toronto being able to hang in with that. Same reason that I'm rooting for Toronto if the Canes are able to get through, just because I think Carolina can't beat Florida, but they could get past a Toronto team in that Eastern Conference final. On the West, my number 3 would be Edmonton, just because I think they get past Vegas. I don't really see them doing much against Dallas. But if the Jets are able to go through, as you say, I think Edmonton's got the star power. If they can figure it out a little bit on the defensive end, maybe get Ekholm back for that 3rd round, I still think they're a cup favorite. I have them as my cup winner. So those are the top 3. Number 4, I'm going to go with Vegas, and I'm going to take that as a toss-up there in that 3-4 spot. Whoever wins that series obviously is a pretty big contender to get through to the Stanley Cup, and I think you could take any of those 3 between Dallas, Vegas, and Edmonton to move on there. I'm not going to put Winnipeg in that top section, though. I just don't think that they're a playoff team still. I think Hellebuck's struggles are a serious concern, and I'm also concerned about the injuries to Scheifele and Morrissey that don't seem to be in between your ears at all there, Maddie. But I think that's going to be a main reason that they don't last very long here in the second round. So Dallas, number 1, Florida 2, Edmonton 3, Vegas 4 for me. Carolina is my 5, just because I think that they're able to get past Washington, and Washington would be a pretty close 6. And again, that's just as you said, it's crazy to say because, all those teams are so strong. I don't think that Toronto, if they get past Florida, which I could see, I don't think is happening. I don't think that they can beat either of Carolina or Washington. So I'm going to put them down at 7. I still think the East is easier than the West. Winnipeg is my number 8, which is outrageous with how good that team is. I think it's the injuries and just the strength of the West. I don't see any chance Winnipeg wins the Stanley Cup final, or for that matter, is able to make it out of the Western Conference.
I would. I'd love to go back on that quote there. Just doubting the President's Trophy team after what we just saw.
Man, they don't win. President's Trophy teams do not win the Stanley Cup.
I want to say they, percentage-wise, have the most of any team that makes it there. I think the curse
in
is
the history
bullshit.
of the NHL.
I think the curse
we're going with
is
this
nonsense.
one since 1920.
No, it's recent too. I think it's since they expanded to 16 teams. I think the curse is nonsense. I really do. I think
how old is the curse?
I mean, people have
last
been saying
year was the
curse for years.
First year in 7 or 8 years. We're gonna have to save this one for next round. It's gonna take too long. Next week, Matt's coming back with the stats. Actually, I'll come back. I'm gonna have a little bit of a delay before Jake's on here. So I will come back with the answer to that one. But
Here's the number. Since
all right, there we go.
85-86, 8 of the 37 President's Trophy winners have won the Stanley Cup, which is 21% of the Stanley Cups came from a single location in the standings, right?
Yep.
So again,
Recency bias.
I don't think
if we're counting out of 1985, 6, 7, 90, I'm still not very high if I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan.
Yeah, it's been, let's see, there's been 3 since 2000. So 3 of 25.
So which that's not 21%.
Well, no, yeah. If we keep scrolling since 2014, it's 0%. So if we're going to take an 11-year sample,
even more to my point.
I'll give you your numbers. Yeah, I mean, I still believe that you put in the best team statistically in the regular season as the team that, quote, can't even get out of the West is absurd. But
they are not healthy right now, and we'll see. We'll wait and see. But no, I do not have much faith in the Winnipeg Jets. All right, Matty, what's going on for you as we transition over and I have to stop looking at you finally?
I know it's such a disappointment for you. No, I think May is a much more relaxing month for me than April. A lot of playoff hockey on the dock for the next couple of weeks. Before traveling a ton in June, I'll be pretty much in a new state every month, and then out of the country for the last week and a half of it. So we're going to be bouncing around in June. So just trying to save up a little bit of the finances for that, and spending a lot of time on my couch watching Winnipeg and Toronto just carry the playoffs here. We're going to see an all-Canadian final here. I think if Toronto makes the finals, I do want to try and bounce over to the Square for one of the games because I think it'd be unbelievable to be in that atmosphere for a road game. But we got.
Let me know if you're going. I'll be back in Rochester, so I would definitely go out there regardless. I'm hoping it's Canes Leafs. That would be cool. Heading down to Raleigh in about a week and a half, going for Game 6. Should they make it there, but we'll see. And I'm certainly rooting that your Leafs prediction is right as long as the Hurricanes win. I love seeing the Toronto Maple Leafs knocked out, but if it happens to be at the hands of the Hurricanes, I'll have no problem with that. Matty, good work as always, buddy. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll run it back next week as we get ready to look at all of the playoff missers. Couple of disappointing ones in there, including your San Jose Sharks, who potentially, I believe tonight, could find out whether they're the lottery pick again.
Do we want the breaking news for those who are?
Is it out? Is it out?
Happen. The Islanders jumped from 10-1, and the Sharks are at 2. So
no way. The Islanders.
The disappointment is I wore the Sharks shirt in kind of like a solidarity kind of move. But look at the Islanders. They got an extra first round from Colorado. They got the number 1 pick now, which is going to be great for them. I think Callum Ritchie and Danny Nelson up the middle they were talking about on the lottery show. Like, they look solid moving forward for whatever GM's going to take over that job. But, yep, the Sharks will be at 2, which I still think for this kind of draft where depth is a lot more of a factor than star power, I'm okay with them being at number 2. But might miss out on that left side defenseman that could pair with Dickinson well and Matthew Schaefer, but that's for another episode.
Are we still calling James Hagen's number 1 and Islanders from the 10 spot? Is it rigged? Are we putting that one out there? No, I'm only joking.
The one thing I did see on Twitter, because of the Olympics in 2026, they've canceled the NHL All-Star game that was supposed to be on the island. So the state of New York was very upset.
I'm sorry from the league there.
They sent a letter to Gary Bettman saying, hey, what the hell? You didn't consult us by this. You just canceled our All-Star game. And 2 hours later, they win the lottery from the 10 spot. So I don't know. Maybe a little bit of false play, but I'm happy San Jose is at least on the top 2.
For the next week, Matt will be loading up his conspiracy theories. Matty, we're kicking you off, buddy. Jake Swanson's up next. Appreciate all your hard work and your terrible insight, but you continue to listen to the Fifth Liners podcast. Matt will be back next week. We continue on up next with some PWHL. Well, we finally got Matt out of here. Now we welcome on Jake Swanson, and time to talk a little bit of PWHL. And in the process of turning it over, we've also recruited a guest that will be coming on here to close off the episode, as Jake is about ready to tell us all the interesting information about the PWHL upcoming playoffs and the finish to the regular season. Ottawa Charge's Stephanie Markowski will tell us even more about the playing scene in Ottawa, all the things she's excited about. But Jake, what's been going on, buddy?
A lot of work, Casey. A lot of work. I'm on call this week, so you caught me on my lunch break, and just had to give the audience a little bit of a break from a Matt.
Right.
I know there's too many Matts on this podcast, even though I love Matty dearly. So talking about PWHL here, and it's been a really exciting end to the season. Minnesota, the story of the last week. They win out their last two games to make the playoffs over the Boston Fleet, and they beat Boston in the last game of the regular season pretty handedly, 8-1, and they make it a statement going into the playoffs. And of course, two of our favorites from Clarkson and Dom Petrie and Brooke McQuigg going to be tasting their first Walter Cup playoff action. And it's going to be a really good one, Casey. Minnesota, the lone U.S. team out of the four, Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa all make it in. So it's very Canadian dominated, but don't let that fool you, because Minnesota came back once before from the 4 seed to win the inaugural Walter Cup. So starts on Wednesday, May 7th. So tomorrow, as we're recording this, 7 p.m., Minnesota and Toronto go to battle. And then Thursday, May 8th, Ottawa and Montreal start their walk to the Walter Cup at 7 p.m. as well. So it's going to be a really good 2 series. The Montreal Victoire, the 1 seed, got to pick their opponent. Another nuance for the PWHL rules is the number 1 seed gets to choose between the 3 and the 4 seed. And they might have seen last year what happened to Toronto when they chose Minnesota in the first round. So they opted to go for the Charge. And as we'll hear from Stephanie Markowski later, I think it was a kind of a no-brainer choice for Montreal. They pretty handedly defeated the Charge in the first 3 matchups they had this season. Ottawa took the last 2, but it looks like they're on pretty even playing field, whereas Minnesota always has that little kickstart to them towards the end of the season, as we've seen these last 2 years. So interested to see how that one will go for Toronto. Again, they're probably seeing some flashbacks from last year, but I think it's going to be a good one. In terms of these 2 playoff matchups, Casey, I know you've been following around the Frost for a little bit, but what one of the 4 teams are you most excited to see in this 2025 playoff run?
Well, I got a special touch on the Frost there, and as you mentioned there, I've been at 4 of their games over the last month, so just following Brooke and Dom's, and got to see Steph a couple of times as well. But I'm very interested to see how the Frost can do, and you got to think that the playoff format, the way it's set up right now, favors them pretty heavily because they're the only West Coast team. They're used to that crazy schedule travel dynamic where the East Coast teams, with the exception of having to go out to Minnesota, are all staying in the Eastern time zone. They're all relatively centrally located, with really the farthest travel probably being a New York to Montreal trip, New York to Toronto maybe, but nothing longer than maybe 6 hours, say. So that trip for Toronto, having to go out to Minnesota, could really be a deal breaker. And for Minnesota, I think it comes down really to whether or not they can get the goaltending. Some of the games they've lost have been a little bit shaky on the goaltending side. Other times they've been, real solid with the tandem they have in net. So they've got the offensive firepower. I think Montreal's got to be one of the favorites in that category, with Marie-Philippe Poulin leading the charge, Stacy on the same line with her, which has been the story the whole season. And it might be pretty fitting if they can lift the Walter Cup at the end. But it's making up to be an exciting playoff here, with the news on the new expansion that just got released. Two brand new franchises coming out, Vancouver and Seattle, and I'm sure you've got a couple touches on that coming up. But I think that just moves even more eyes towards the women's hockey side, and specifically in this upcoming playoff.
Yeah, and that expansion is one of the biggest news drops we've had for the PWHL in the last couple months. So very excited to touch on that. But talking more about the playoff matchups here, as they're very much upcoming for Minnesota and Toronto. I think this one is going to be one to watch in terms of a little bit of a preview here. Minnesota, their leading scorer is Captain America Kendall Coyne Schofield. She's got 24 points in 30 games played, even 12 goals, 12 assists, and plus 12 on that. So she's been the catalyst of this offense, but not to be overshadowed is number 1 overall pick from last year, Taylor Heisey, the former Minnesota Golden Gopher, as our friend Matt Leonardo would be jumping up and down right about now. She's got 22 points in 29 games, 8 goals, 14 assists. And then one of the most recent picks from this past draft, Sophie Jacques, former Ohio State Buckeye and teammate of Stephanie Markowski, 22 points as well, 7 goals and 15 assists on the blue line. So those top 3 right there are pretty formidable if you're Toronto. And on the other side here for Toronto, they've had some shakeups. I know they were on the side of one of the trades here in Savannah Harmon going from the Charge to Toronto, and she's been absolutely outstanding for Toronto. Really solid presence on that blue line. But their top 3 are names we've been very used to saying, especially on the college side of the broadcast. Daryl Watts, the Wisconsin Badger, 27 points in 30 games played. Hannah Miller, who was looking for a while there, like she was going to take the points trophy here in the PWHL early in the season. 24 points in 29 games. She slowed down a little bit at the end of the year, but still a very formidable forward there. And then last but not least, a very familiar Clarkson face, Renata Fast on the blue line, 22 points, 6 goals, and 16 assists. So again, I'd say fairly even stacked up on the outside players in terms of the forwards and D. In terms of the goaltending, of course, you've got Kristen Campbell in the Toronto net. And then for Minnesota, again, Casey kind of mentioned that they've got a couple of shaky performances towards the end of the year. They've got Maddie Rooney, Nicole Hensley, and Lucy Morgan in the mix for that crease. So, Casey, in terms of this matchup, who do you think is going to be the X factor? Do you have a name for me?
I think Campbell's the star, and it goes back to that goaltending with the question marks. Hensley's probably going to get the go, it looks like, for Minnesota. If she can lock it down, Minnesota, I would say, I've been very impressed in the games I've watched, the physicality that they implement. Britta Curl has had a couple of big hits. One of them was a headliner against Danielle Serdachny up in Ottawa, and I think that's the most fun part to watch, that they've implemented the hitting. And it seems to be, there's a few complaints on the questions of what the real rule is, but it seems like they're trying to get it closer and closer to the men's style of game. I think Minnesota has the physical edge in that component. Toronto's got the bigger names though. So it comes down to, playoff experience. I would say still sides, although Minnesota won last year with the Toronto Scepters, they've got the star-studded Canadian, USA names from the Olympic rosters. So I think you're trying to rely on those big time names if you're the Toronto side. Minnesota, rather, it's more depth.
Yeah. And then going over to the 1 versus 3 matchup on the other side. In Montreal, top 3 are all forwards, and again, names we're so used to saying in professional hockey. Marie-Philippe Poulin, Captain Canada, 26 points in 30 games, 19 goals, led the league in goals, 7 assists. Right behind her is her wife, Laura Stacey, and she's got 22 points, 11 goals, and 11 assists. So those two, 1-2 punch, very formidable on that forward line. And then right behind them, Jennifer Gardner, 5 goals, 13 assists for 18 points, and all of them above a plus 10 on the forward line. So really big offensive power. And of course, in the net, Anne Renee Desbiens is coming back after an injury before the international break. And she got shaken up a little bit, and hopefully she'll be ready to go. I think the reports were saying that she was ready to go for the playoffs, but we'll have to wait and see until probably tomorrow. They'll probably release their injuries, but definitely intrigued to see like what they're going to do in terms of the goaltending if she's not ready. But I think that there's probably a good chance that she is. And then on the other side for Ottawa, Teresa Vajanova is the leading point scorer on the Charge side. She's got 15 goals and 7 assists for 22 points, not too far behind Poulin for that goals lead. And then two more forwards on there in Emily Clark and Cheyenne Darkangelo are right behind her with 19 and 17 points respectively. So a lot of interesting forward names on there. The D-core is definitely, I think, going to be my X factor for this series. Whoever's blue line can, I think, stand up to that offensive firepower of both teams is going to probably come out the winner here. And we talked to Steph Markowski about this, and she said as long as they can kind of contain that Montreal forecheck, I think is going to be a big one there. So, Casey, same question for this series. Is there a person or a name that stands out on either side here?
Well, it's got to be Marie-Philippe Poulin, and she seems completely ageless, it's unbelievable. And I remember probably my first memory of watching women's hockey, and pretty close to that of first memories of watching hockey in general on the world stage, was Marie-Philippe Poulin's performance in the Olympics. And at 34 years old, she's still the top name in women's hockey. And it's so impressive how she continues to stay relevant, continues to be a game breaker in the game of women's hockey. I think for her, and that line to, those stars, kind of the same as Toronto. Montreal's going to have to rely on their stars. Ottawa's a little bit more like the Minnesota side, where they have a lot of depth, a few of those top names, but primarily a younger team. And we've seen a big switch in even in the national game, the youth movement in women's hockey, where you have so much star talent coming out of college now, and these young players. Danielle Serdachny, one of those on Ottawa. We're going to talk to Steph Markowski, players like that who are the next generation. They're trying to make their mark here. So it seems like a perfect time to throw it over, Jake, as we'll welcome Stephanie Markowski, who just joined us. And then when we come back, Jake and I will talk a little bit about PWHL expansion. You're listening to the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. Steph Markowski coming up next. It's our pleasure to welcome special guest Stephanie Markowski, who decided early this morning that she had enough time for us. And Steph, appreciate you coming on here on some pretty short notice, but we'll give you our hardest questions for the next 10 minutes or so. Jake, I'll let you start it off. And Steph playing out in Ottawa right now, just about ready to get going in the playoffs upcoming.
Yeah, Steph, and biggest news came out a couple days ago that you guys were chosen as the opponent for the first seed, the Montreal Victoire. Just wanted to get your thoughts on them picking you over the 4 seed Minnesota and what your guys' mentality is going into this first series.
Yeah, obviously we were all watching that, kind of excited who they were going to pick, but I mean, it didn't come as a real surprise. I mean, even just logistically, travel-wise, they're way closer to us than Minnesota. So that comes into effect. And then also just, I mean, every team in this league is so close that any team could win this series. So them picking us, I mean, it does give us a chip on our shoulder, and we kind of saw what happened last year. So hopefully we win and kind of show them. But yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions on that. But I mean, anyone could win. So yeah.
Jake and I had the honor of watching you from your early college days. What have been the biggest differences in the transition to this new league in the PWHL from your first experiences playing 5 years in college?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference would just be the depth of the teams. Every team that you're going up against every night, like, it's going to be a battle and it can go either way. And I think you saw that in the standings. Like, they switched so much in the last couple games because it was so close. And yeah, you just can't take a game off. You can't take a shift off, or the puck will end up in the back of your net. Whereas college, some games, not that they were easy, but they were a bit of a lighter opponent.
Yeah, and talking about the depth on these teams and going specifically to your first round matchup in Montreal, they've got some really talented players over there. I mean, first headline is Marie-Philippe Poulin, Captain Canada, and someone that I'm assuming you've watched growing up. And what on the blue line are you guys looking to do in that first round matchup against such a star power up front?
Yeah, like that's something that we've been talking about as a decor for sure. And when you have players like her or Stacy, and they have a lot of experience in these big moments, but I think for us, just getting in their head and every time we're around them, either giving them a bump or just anything to get them off their game, because they are big players and they can make uh, big plays at big times. So yeah, just getting in their face, blocking shots, playing gritty, because that's what playoff hockey is all about. So.
You and Marie-Philippe Poulin have no strangers so far to getting in each other's face. You got right up and got put in a nice headlock by her. We always talk to the guys that are in the NHL about like your welcome to the league moment. Obviously, she's somebody that you've been watching growing up in Canada since you probably started playing hockey. What have been some of the coolest moments in the PWHL so far for you?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of cool moments, but two that stick out to me would probably be my first ever game, and that was in Montreal. So playing against Pooh, playing against those type of names that I've looked up to since I was a kid, that was really cool. And I don't know if you guys have watched a game in Montreal, but their crowd is electric and like so loud. They have a DJ, so that atmosphere was really cool to play in for my first game. And then I think the other moment that was pretty cool this year was the Edmonton, just going back to where I'm from, and like I had I think over 50 family and friends there, and we were able to sell at Rogers. And like growing up, I would watch the Oilers all the time, and I would like obviously really looked up to them, but I knew like that wouldn't be the path that I could take as a girl. So seeing them play there and then seeing all these girls play there and sell it out, that was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, and a lot of firsts and a lot of record-breaking attendances for the PWHL this year. And I know I kind of wanted to touch on this as well as the other big announcement for the PWHL is the two expansion franchises coming in Vancouver and Seattle. What's been the talk around the locker room in terms of the new expansion teams and also maybe possible expansion draft, people switching teams? Has there been any like discourse about that?
Yeah, like for sure leading up to it, there was a lot of chatter around the league and rumors and stuff. So when they announced it, obviously we weren't surprised because we kind of heard some stuff before, but I think it's great for the league to expand. And even when we do, that's why we do the takeover tours to kind of get a feel of like what markets would be good to expand to. And Vancouver and Seattle did awesome. So I think they'll do really good, and expanding out west is important too, right? Just to get a larger audience. And I think it's cool and it adds some different aspects to the game, like the expansion draft. That'll be really interesting, just the way it works. We don't really know exactly how it's going to work, like protecting players and who can get what, and also the draft with the new players. So that'll be really interesting, even for the fans to see how it shakes out. And I think it's also interesting for us and the fans just to see how the league decides to do it, because I think they try to be a bit different than the NHL, just with some rules and stuff. So it'll be interesting for sure.
You mentioned how cool it was going home on the takeover tour. Your roommates with Danielle Serdachny, who in college was a bitter rival, one of your childhood best friends. How cool was it seeing both of your guys' names plastered all over signs during warm-up skating around there?
Yeah, that was super cool. I mean, both of us grew up there. We were both born there. We live 5 minutes from each other, and our families are best friends, and we're best friends. So to experience that with her, who's like one of the only Edmonton girls, I think we're the only Edmonton girls in the PWHL right now. That was really cool. just to share that moment with her and our families to share that with each other.
Yeah, and you two have both played on some of the biggest stages in college hockey. I mean, you, a former national champion with the Ohio State Buckeyes, and Danielle, not a stranger to the Frozen Four and with Colgate. So, what do you think, especially with the two of you having that kind of college playoff experience, what do you think that's going to mean upcoming for the PWHL playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt. Like going to that national championship game in the Frozen Four, you kind of learn what it takes to get the job done in those high pressure games. But honestly, I've never been a part of really a 5 game series against just one team. Like that'll be a first for me. And I mean, Ottawa didn't make the playoffs last year, so that'll be a first for a lot of us. But we do have some players on the team who were in different markets last year who have that playoff experience. So we've been talking to them and kind of asking them questions, and the coaches have been getting feedback from even them to just what it's like and how to kind of ride through that series. So we're super excited and can't wait to get started.
You touched on the atmosphere that first game in Montreal, but Ottawa has been no disappointment. Talk a little bit about the fan base there, what you expect them to bring to the playoff atmosphere.
Oh yeah, we have, I think, the best fans in the league. They're so passionate. Like every game they come with their signs, and half the time I'm looking at the Jumbotron to seeing what type of signs they bring. But no, they're awesome. And I know when we were fighting for a playoff spot in Toronto, they even had watch parties here supporting us, and we definitely feel the love from them. So we just want to like give it back and do well for them.
Yeah, and you guys again on the road to start in Montreal, and then you guys get at least one playoff game in Ottawa on the 13th of May. So looking forward to see you guys do that and see what the fans are into. And I was just wondering, what do you think in terms of your next moves as a team? Like what is something that you guys are focusing on this series? I know we touched on the D line, but like as a full team, what are you guys focusing on?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think one of them is just quick transitions. Often against Montreal, they can be aggressive. So if we can beat their forecheck and beat them up ice, and then another thing that's, I mean, everyone says it, but it's true in playoffs, just getting to that net and always having someone net front and someone backdoor to get those greasy rebounds because they have good goaltending, obviously, and lots of experience back there in net. So we need to, yeah, take away our eyes and D get pucks through, and then forwards be there to pound them in.
You're an upcoming free agent this summer here. How much emphasis is put towards your goals on this playoff here to, make a push towards that next contract looking forward? And what are some of your goals looking towards next year and in years upcoming?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's huge. Like, I think this year has been a good rookie year for me as a D coming in. But yeah, I mean, playoffs is what it's all about. So showing what I can do and impacting the team the best I can do, is definitely what I want to show, my GM and, hopefully, yeah, get a contract next year. I mean, I don't know how the rules work now with expansion, but when you're drafted, they have your rights for 2 years. So, I don't have a contract for next year, but I think they might have my rights for next year. But I mean, time will tell how the rules kind of shake up.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about like the new rules that the PWHL has been implementing. And in terms of that, throughout the whole season, which one of the newer rules that you've been exposed to have been one of the like most interesting and most fun to deal with?
There's a few, but I like the jailbreak rule. I know a lot of people like that because it's fun when you're on the PK, you're just trying to get that goal. And then when you do get that goal, I mean, the fans go crazy. I was in the box for one, and we scored shorthanded, and then, I broke free and
Surprise
got
there,
out.
hey?
So, yeah, that was pretty cool because it's just like not only did you kill the penalty, but now you're out of there and your team's up. So I like that rule.
Last year you went to Ohio State, won the national championship, and the new league was kind of coming into formation. A couple of your teammates at Clarkson, Gab David, one of them that made the decision to go straight to the league. How much excitement was there as you watch the success that the league had, knowing that you were going into the draft this past year. And what do you think that the success that the league has continued to have, the expansion upcoming, is going to have on the impact overall for women's hockey when you think about the development of the NCAA, the expansion of the NCAA as well, but also girls thinking about maybe coming over from Europe rather than staying over there to play, and how strong the PWHL could become as the next showcase for women's hockey?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in college, that's definitely what I was set for, the draft, and seeing that first year was really cool and like all the traction it got. But I mean, that was years in the making. Like, honestly, I got to give credit to all the girls who were on those Olympic teams and playing in different leagues all the time and folding because they kind of stuck it out and they're the reason that we have this league today. So, first off, for them, big thanks. And then I think for the future, I mean, when we do those takeover tours or even here in our markets, you can see the involvement of the fans and all the little girls or even little boys who are so into it. So it's definitely growing at a good pace. And with expansion, that'll help even more. And just like when I was younger, I didn't really have any girls to watch. I would watch the NHL and then the Olympics, but that's, I mean, once every 4 years and just for a small amount of time. So to have like representation for those young girls now, I think it'll show them and that they can one day be a professional athlete. And then maybe if they're not into hockey and they see it because it's on TV and broadcasted everywhere, that maybe they'll join. So I think it is just going to keep growing.
Yeah, and growing the game has been the PWHL's, I think, first and foremost goal. And in my eyes, and I think in Casey's eyes too, it's definitely accomplished that. So we've seen a lot of different hockey fans do that. And I think you as a hockey fan as well, and knowing that the players are hockey fans as well, is a really cool aspect. So thanks for touching on that. And I did want to give you a question as you as a fan, not you as a player. What are you looking forward to for your hometown Oilers against the Knights in this second round here?
I'm hoping for a win. Oh my gosh. I'm really hoping they keep going so I can come back to Edmonton and go to a game or go to those watch parties. But yeah, it's super exciting and I hope they keep rolling. I mean, they came back last series, which I was very nervous about, but they pulled through. So I think they're hot and they're going to keep going.
Steph's going to be channeling her inner McDavid in the upcoming round here. Steph, Jake, and I were there for your first career college goal. Hopefully, we'll be tuned in for another one, first career playoff goal in the pros upcoming. Big thanks for joining us for a couple minutes here, and again, especially on such short notice. Steph got a text this morning and said, "Hell yeah, I'm in." But always a pleasure to catch up. It's been a lot of fun seeing your progress and seeing the league's progress.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you to our friend Steph Markowski for hopping on. And Jake, it is an exciting time in the PWHL, and you hinted at it at the end of that interview there with PWHL expansion, the biggest news probably since the creation of the league. I would put this above the creation of the terrible names of the original six. It is the incoming pair of expansion franchises in Vancouver and Seattle. And this was completely head scratching again to me, not for the same reason of the name drop, but with the East Coast centered franchises. A lot of the talk was Pittsburgh, Detroit, Quebec City, Calgary was thrown in there a little bit. Nope, all the way to the west and about as far west as you could possibly go. Van and Seattle. How excited are you for those two?
I think it's going to be good. And I mean, we've seen the success in the NHL with the Seattle Kraken. And I mean, Climate Pledge Arena, one of the most beautiful arenas I've seen. I really want to go see it in person, but just from the videos and the pictures that I've seen at that place, I'm really excited for that Seattle franchise. In Vancouver, I mean, that's another classic hockey city in British Columbia, and I think it's just on brand for the PWHL again to do one American, one Canadian to kind of keep that balance going. And I think talking about like the Western expansion, I think that was probably the second option I would say, like for me, if I was the one deciding this. It's still a good option, and I think the fact that we have more hockey for West Coast teams, it's definitely a lot easier for fans over there to see those two games rather than if there's a 7 p.m. game on a Tuesday like there is in the playoffs. They're going to have to watch it as they get out of work at 4 p.m. So I think it's definitely a logical step, and I'm excited. I really am. Like Steph was saying in that interview, I'm excited to see how the expansion draft works, see how protection of players works. We've only seen it a couple times in our lifetime for major league teams on the men's side. So seeing that in, I think actually the WNBA just had their expansion draft as well for their new franchises. So I'm interested to see how it'll work, but I think it's going to be really, really fun. And this gives the girls even more of the country to kind of take the game to and kind of show them what the PWHL is all about.
You could see a path for 12 teams coming in pretty quickly. They'll have 8 starting next year. We know Pittsburgh and Detroit are on the forefront. Detroit specifically has a huge market for it. And if they keep with that U.S.-Canadian mix, maybe Edmonton, Calgary, get the Battle of Alberta going, keep those 2 Canadian markets, and get Detroit and Pittsburgh going. But the future is bright. You wanted to close us off here with a little bit of a competition on trying to pick the upcoming team names. We went completely over when we picked the original 6 here. Hopefully we have a little bit better luck upcoming. But Seattle and Vancouver, let's start in the Great White North here in Canada. What is your selection for Vancouver's team name?
So the PWHL has been posting a little bit about the history of women's hockey in Vancouver, and one team name that keeps coming up is the Vancouver Amazons. Now, I don't think that would do too well in the modern market, just because Amazon, the the company, might be a little bit upset with that name, but I still think it would be a really cool one to say. If I had to go for something that wouldn't piss off Jeff Bezos, probably would have to go for the Vancouver Orcas, and kind of a nod to their April Fool's joke that they made. I don't know if you saw that, Case, but
I did not know.
Jocks and Jill's a great podcast, by the way. Love watching them. They put up a post saying on April Fool's Day, the newest expansion team for the PWHL was the Oahu Orcas in Hawaii. I legit almost sent it to the group chat until I saw it was April Fool's Day, and I was like, no way. There's no way that we're going all the way to Hawaii. But hey, I mean, they were right on the direction. It was a little less west, but still all the way west on the continental side of North America. So, but yeah, I'll go with the Orcas.
I don't know how much of a market Hawaii would have, regardless of the level of sports team for the hockey market. On the Vancouver side, I was trying to think of mountains and the Canadian Rockies going through there. I've got 2 suggestions that all revolve around alliteration. My first one, the Vancouver Vortex. The definition of vortex, high altitude echoes through fierce winds. That could be a feisty name if they're looking to be a little bit more majestic. How about the Vancouver Vistas? What do you think about those 2, partner?
I like those. I really like the Vortex because it almost seems like the antithesis of the Minnesota Frost. So, like, I think that would be a good little battle there. Two natural disasters going at it would be really fun.
What do you got for Seattle?
Seattle, I'm going to go... See, so this one was my tougher one just because I didn't have anything to go off of, but I'm
changing mine since what I told you.
Oh, yeah?
Came up with a way better one.
Oh, okay. All right. That's putting me in the hot seat now. I don't know. I think the Seattle... I was going to say, we were talking about the Seattle Surge before. I think that one would be good. I would also throw out the Seattle Sound. I know we said that for the for New York for like the Long Island sound. But I think either of those alliterations would be really fun.
Well, as I'm sitting here thinking about my alliteration about how the mountains work, neither of those really speak to me too much, but I still go back to my rifling dispute of the original 6 names and the lack of Athens rock lobsters and Orlando solar bears. Seattle is known for, well, maybe more than one thing, but if you think of Seattle and one place you could go see something, what would spark your mind?
The Space Needle. Look at that.
No, Seattle Space Needles, maybe. Nope. I'm thinking of a particularly more smelly place.
I don't got it. You got to
Fish
enlighten.
market.
Oh, okay. All right.
There's one fish particularly that Seattle is known for at the fish market that get chucked down lines. It is the salmon. How about the Seattle scoring salmon?
Ooh, okay. I could see that.
I didn't even need ChatGPT for that one. That one came straight off the dome.
Yeah, I like that.
Huh?
Yeah.
The scoring salmon. If anyone's out there listening in Seattle, that one could make you a lot of money on T-shirt sales. And I still think if we're trying to grow the game, something that's funny enough to get idiots like me to spend $35 on a shirt. Come on.
Yeah.
I got my Rock Lobsters merch. Give me the scoring salmon.
Take lessons from all of the minor leagues. I swear. It's just one of the best.
Exactly. The yard goats? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, buddy, what do you got going on the rest of the week coming up?
Right now, a lot of work coming up, but hoping my baseball season gets a little bit started. The Akron Orioles going to be starting play on Memorial Day weekend. So going to try my best to get back into baseball shape, and hopefully I don't pull anything. That's my goal for this year.
I believe there was a big mountain excursion that we missed out on as well.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't fall off a cliff.
I didn't.
That's a good start.
We went rock climbing out in Vegas. Went to Red Rocks, not the concert venue, but Red Rocks National Park out there, and beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And yes, I did not fall. I actually did some lead climbing where you're clipping in as you go, and I was terrified the whole time, but I did it.
Congratulations, buddy. We're proud of you. Just like Matt and his marathon running, and I am still just sitting on the couch. So I guess I got to figure out something I need some big athletic feat to one up a marathon and hiking the Red Rocks. Stay tuned on that. Next week, we've got some disappointments as we look through the 16 non-playoff contenders as the Stanley Cup playoffs march on. The Walter Cup playoffs are just getting started, and that will close it out for us here. 29 episodes down. We're closing in on the 1 year mark. We'll probably be around 33 episodes as we turn 1 year old here on the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. If you haven't yet and you're still sitting here listening, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Instagram and TikTok at Fifth Liners Pod. On Twitter or X, it is at Fifth Line Pod. That's the number 5. We are always posting, but going to be back to a more regular schedule here and getting back to our weekly shows as we close in on the summer. For Jake Swanson, I'm Casey Ditzel, as well for Matt Leonardo, who was on earlier. Big thank you to Steph Markowski. Stay tuned until next week. Have a good one, everybody.